my name is Ridley. I'm the Senior Director of Humanitarian Operations for WorldVision International. That's an interesting question. I think, like many people of my age, I sort of fell into it rather than aspiring to it as a career. So I've been doing humanitarian work for 21 years, and it came about because I was in a job that I wasn't really enjoying, and talking to a friend who was in humanitarian work, who said, well, why don't you give this a try? And I had some language skills that the agency he worked for was looking for. So they hired me and put me out in the field with the food aid program, and that's how I started 21 years ago. But I guess the question is, why have I kept at it? Obviously, it's a very fulfilling career. So even though I got into it, if you like, accidentally, it's something that I've stuck at for a couple of decades now. Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, I was encouraged by colleagues to put my name forward for the Humanitarian Coordinator pool. So I did that, and the selection process for that pool is a competency-based interview on Skype, which is done by the Emergency Directors Group, including an NGO representative. And I passed the HC selection process. And then I had a conversation with UN OCHA and said, well, I'd be interested in putting my name forward for the resident coordinator pool. That's a bit more of a rigorous process. It involves an assessment centre. So the first step is OCHA deciding that they want to put you forward as a candidate. Most UN agencies put their own candidates forward. If you don't have a UN background, and I have never worked for the UN, then you have to be sponsored by UN OCHA. So I don't know how they make that decision specifically. I would imagine it's a competency-based decision, but I was put forward for the assessment centre. That took place in December 2014. It was a very rigorous 3-day process, and a few weeks after that I was told that I'd passed, and now I'm a member of the resident coordinator pool. Now, that doesn't mean I'll automatically become a resident coordinator, of course. As a NGO person, I'm lacking that UN experience. So the next career step for me, the next thing that I've got to work on, is getting some of that experience so that I can work within that system effectively. So I'm currently in conversations with Claire Messina and others at OCHA about how to go about that. Yes, so the RC pool is designed to assess whether you have the competencies to do the job. And the UN is trying hard to broaden the pool by inviting people with non-UN backgrounds, people from countries and backgrounds that perhaps typically haven't been resident coordinators before. So I was fortunate to be invited to go through the process to enter the pool. Now, once you're in the pool, that means that they've assessed you as competent to be a resident coordinator. But of course, there's a world of difference between being a resident coordinator in a large, complicated country, which is perhaps very emergency prone, where you will be double-hatted as an RCHC, or being resident coordinator in primarily a development context or a small country. So the actual application process then looks not only at whether you're part of the pool, that's the first step, but then whether you've got the competencies for that specific job. So language, political abilities that are maybe relevant to the context, experience in the region or sub-region. So the next step for me would be to start applying for some of those jobs based on where my interests lie, what jobs are coming available. And of course, as a humanitarian, I'm interested particularly in being a humanitarian coordinator. So I'd be interested in working in those contexts, let's say Sudan, South Sudan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the more difficult contexts. But I wouldn't want to go into one of those places as my first job as a humanitarian coordinator. So it's important to have some wisdom and ease in gently, if you like. Maybe look at a role with OCHA, or look at a role as a deputy humanitarian coordinator. But all of these roles are competitive, so getting into the pool is an important step, but actually getting the job is also a competitive process. Yeah, so if I look at my own situation, and I mentioned already one of the challenges that I have is lack of UN experience. I would encourage people who are perhaps earlier in their careers to think about moving between the UN, the NGO world, maybe even the donor world. The broader your experience, the better I think you're going to be able to undertake that HC or RC role. I'd encourage people that are working in NGOs and maybe have 10, 15 years experience to give some serious thought to becoming a humanitarian coordinator or a resident coordinator. We're often quite critical of the system, and I believe the only way really we can work for a more effective system is from the inside. So I'd encourage people to try and become part of the system to change it for the better.